The King of Podcasts Radio Network proudly presents the Broadcasters Podcast. Here is the King of Podcasts.
And welcome to the first part of the 2023 Year in Media Review here on the Broadcasters Podcast. Thanks for listening in. Finding the show. Episode 307, this is. And which means I'm about to go ahead and start wrapping up what has been the fifth year of this program. We will start year 6 coming up in January because whatever it was, I remember I had gotten done for another season of the Wrestling is Real podcast, which is the first show that came out of everything else. And like I said, 2018, I've already done the show, the Wrestling's here for 6 years. And I was like, I wanted to do the second show. It's around that time, and usually it's around this time of year where I have a little more time to myself, a little more creativity to go through. And I was thinking, all right, let me develop the show. And so around that time, things kind of slowed down a bit, and I had the time to say, okay, let me get this show together. And I first called it Creative, Not Corporate. Not the best name. But even the Broadcasters Podcast doesn't encompass everything, but I never found a better name for it because it's a bit of a name that nobody talks about too much, but broadcasting is still what we're doing. Whether it's content creation, whether it's radio, TV, music, or movies, we're still broadcasting because we're casting a broad net, transmitting it in some way, shape, or form across either airways or across, various movie theaters or performing houses or whatever there is. Streaming services, televisions, tablets, computers, phones. It's all getting out there, transmitted somewhere. We are broadcasting in some way, shape, or form. Podcasting, we are broadcasting. That's why I keep it like that. And one of the things I did for this year of the program is that I started changing it from more of an industry-centric program to, what can I say? A little bit of clickbait couldn't hurt anybody. So yeah, I started talking more about the subject that we're talking about there that, I thought would be more interesting. Because sometimes I noticed where the numbers were that, if I talk about BTS or if I talked about, various movies are going on or music projects, whatever it was, if I started off with that and I got into the other industry stuff after that, yeah, people would listen to it. They would get into it, they would enjoy it, and they would kind of find their way through, right? It's one of those, the most part, with doing the shows. So when I did that, I was just like, all right, figuring out, okay. And I'll tell you, since I've done the whole part of trying to just add a little more interest, a little more mainstream flair to the program, it's worked. Audience has got a little bit younger. It's interesting. It's great. So I'm glad to go and see all that happening. So otherwise, there's not been much else to go ahead and really bring up in the news that I thought would be very important to go ahead and comment on. When I looked around and see what stories that were left to bring up that I haven't talked about yet, or just anything like that, there wasn't much to go ahead and bring up at all. Because it's like, I'm looking and I'm saying to myself, you know what? There's not much out there. It's just that time of year where nothing's really going on. It's done. We have spent a lot of time, it's also different for the other shows. Depraved and Debaucherous, I always have some other content I could talk about. Wrestling is kind of slows down, so I have to also I'll do your review on that show. I already started that this week. So if you like to catch up on everything that's professional wrestling, I already started the year in review on that. So you got that. Again, listen to if you want to go and check that out. So, like I said, no stories I was going to bring up after the fact, because I'm even looking in my back notes. There's nothing here I was going to bring up. And one thing I will bring up that wasn't in the news that came out is in radio. So this is for music. Radio's been trying to get BMI and ASCAP royalty rates set jointly. You remember we talked about this before previously on the program where radio's been trying to go and do what they can to consolidate and be able to have where both of these licensing agencies, they wanted to do something where the rate setting would be set, or both of them would kind of be set in a certain way. So here's what the story was going back to it. So federal court in New York has dismissed an appeal brought by the Radio License Music Committee. And they appealed the lower court ruling that rates for the two performance rights organizations, the PROs, could be set separately. And the appeals court decision was not based on any legal arguments, but rather procedural grounds. And there's no final order has been issued by the district court setting the rates for ASCAP and BMI. It does not have any jurisdiction yet. There's no other basis for immediate appeal. So the RMLC, they have argued the Music Modernization Act of 2018 ended the old assignment system of rate-setting petitions arising under the consent decrees for BMI and ASCAP, opening the door for rates to be set jointly. rates to be set jointly, which would help for broadcasters. Because if they were set at the same time, it will produce a more reasonable outcome for them. And they will no longer end up paying the two performance rights organization shares that add up to more than 100% of the music market. And the songwriters groups accuse radio of trying to join the two cases to pit ASCAP and BMI against each other. While the court case is going on, there are still interim deals in effect. Now, the RMLC in 2022 of May offered to pay the two performance rights organizations a 3.51% combined of net industry revenue to cover songwriter royalty expenses. And that was the same as it paid under the prior agreement. Right. So the broadcasters want to be able to pay the same kind of royalties they had before. They don't want to pay increases, and they also don't want to go in and deal with separate rates for both groups. Now, court documents also say that BMI countered with a proposal that would have resulted in a 66% increase for composers in its repertoire. ASCAP so far has not offered any proposed new rate, but there's the idea that these performance rights organizations, they've worked with the streamers, they've worked with, TV and streaming services and digital streaming services, right? They've worked on all that. And they're getting the royalties off of that. Songwriter royalties. But now the deal is that if they're able to get this done, and BMI and ASCAP are not going to be held jointly, then they're both going to be individually asking for increases. Like I said, BMI, for instance, if they get their way and the court finds in favor of the performance rights organizations, then BMI will use something like a proposal like this, where they can increase a 66% increase in royalties for composers in its repertoire. So what would radio do? Are you going to rely on the older artists? Because that's the other part they have a problem too. When it comes to streaming, it's one thing where they have, like younger artists, like TikTok, a lot of more younger artists, not so much of the legacy stuff. But radio relies on older artists. When you think about all the songs they have, 60s, 70s, 80s, 90s, but they have to go and pay royalties back on that. And the cost for that, compared to newer music, radio can't afford it. And that's the issue they're coming across here if this was allowed to be happening. And that's what they're afraid of. I would be too. If it were me, I would be also afraid as well. But, you know what I'm saying? This is where you got to just keep in mind and look out for what's happening here, man. Tell you what, it's not good. I saw a thing earlier today about John Lennon, and today marks, 43 years ago today, December 8th, 1980, as I record this, where John Lennon was shot in the archway of the Dakota Hotel, his residence in New York City, at the hands of Mark David Chapman, and that Chapman planned the killing over the course of several months, waited for Lennon at the Dakota in the morning. And then that happened. And of course, you heard, everybody going across here, all the stories, Howard Cosell giving the announcement on the program, and this is a little tip of the hat for Lou Pate, who I always talk to, he had me on his radio program a few times. And I told him about the fact when John Lennon got shot and the way that Howard Cosell handled this. I make it the point that he says that, this is something where Howard Cosell, as a professional, in the best possible way, only knowing seconds before he got back on the air on the broadcast of Monday Night Football, he's the first voice that you hear and anywhere in the media, right then and there on television, national television, to announce the loss of John Lennon. I'm going to play this real quick.
Seconds remaining. John Smith is on the line, and I don't care what's on the line, Howard. You have got to say what we know in the booth.
Yes, we have to say it. Remember, this is just a football game, no matter who wins or loses. An unspeakable tragedy confirmed to us by ABC News in New York City. John Lennon, outside of his apartment building on the west side of New York City, the most famous perhaps of all of the Beatles, shot twice in the back, rushed to Roosevelt Hospital, dead on arrival. Hard to go back to the game after that news flash, which in duty bound we had to take. Frank?
I hear that now. It gives me goosebumps. It's chilling to hear, and I wasn't even live. I wasn't even watching football at that point. I would have been 5 years old. And hearing him go ahead and say that, and just the way he came across in just a short amount of time. You know, one of the things that always caught me up on this, really, because I didn't really, take too much into the whole story of John Lennon and what happened to him, is the Top of the Pops documentaries I've watched. The story of, they do like their annual yearbooks. I've talked about this before on the program. And one of the things I really enjoy is when they do these particular stories. So they start from 1976 all the way up to 2000, I think it's. We're 1999, last one I saw. And when I look at it, I'm like, the 1980 version, very good edition of that documentary. And they made the point of John Lennon's passing and the way they presented it. It wasn't much time to put into it, but this idea of where the songs that come out from that. I've heard the Casey Kasem announcement in the American Top 40 broadcast, because there were two different versions of the broadcast that came out that week after his death. One did not include it. And then there was a revised version that got sent back out that did include his death, because where his song was charting on the countdown at that point, because Starting Over was already charting. I think it was top 10 by that point. And in the middle of that point, instead of what would have been just like a regular description of John Lennon Starting Over, Casey Kasem took about 2 minutes to go ahead and explain the importance of what happened, the tragic death of John Lennon. And then we get into the song. And it's always been something to me when I hear that song again, Starting Over. And now, of course, Merry Christmas War is Over. We hear that now a lot. But it was one of those things where that song just hits. I don't know why. It gives me a chill as well. But I love hearing that song. It's not something where I feel like choked up, but I always enjoy that song. Something more immensely than ever. And among other songs. And then, even then after that, I was like, okay, well, my appreciation for the Beatles and what John Lennon did in his solo career was fascinating, right? Obviously, we had a bunch of hits, much like the other Beatles did. But it was one of those things where, the importance of it. And what he meant. What his message was. Regardless of Yoko. It was one of those things. I look at that and I'm just saying to myself, wow, it was that effort right there of what happened. It was like, it was tough. Really tough. For everybody that saw that. And today I saw on TikTok, there was a thing in Central Park where you saw hundreds upon hundreds of people that all got together, and they all got together and started singing Imagine together, holding lights and, the candles, and you're sitting out there and just remembering it once again. Almost as if it was being fresh, happened, like everyone was outside of Dakota again, just like it was 43 years ago. So. And so they tell the story about Cosell doing it. He says that he interviewed Lennon during a Monday Night Football broadcast in 1974. He was chosen to do so, but was apprehensive at first. He felt the game should take precedence, and it was not their place to break such a big story. But Gifford convinced Cosell otherwise when he told the story of what happened. And that Roone Arledge, who was president of the network sports division, he, as a producer of Monday Night Football, he received word of Lennon's death during the Patriots-Dolphins game. And when the Patriots were about to go ahead and score the field goal, Arledge informed Frank Gifford and Howard Cosell the shooting, suggested they be the ones to report on the murder. Not waiting for ABC News, but just go ahead and report it. And take it from there. So, yeah. Incredible. So now we're going to move along and go forward into talking about the year that was media in 2023. Trust me, we got a whole lot to get into, because if we go on to get into things right now, we're only going to get into the part where it probably leads up until the strikes, the Writers Guild and the Screen Actors Guild, because all that's going to take time. That'll be the next couple of parts. But in this particular part, we're just going to go through things where the constant issues with corporate traditional media struggling, right? The transition from going from the network linear media model, cable, network TV, and trying to get streaming to go and get up and off the board, and trying to get subscribers, and also try to keep subscribers and keep content pretty fresh and ongoing while raising the rates, which was eventually was going to happen. First of the year, we had the Damar Hamlin Buffalo Bills injury, which happened right there, and everybody was all caught up on that. And then I talked about how big media is taking a bloodbath while online content creators are crushing it, because you just saw what was going on. The media sector at the start of the year, because of inflation, wiped $500 billion plus from the media, the big corporate media. It was all hurting about it. And there was a story also brought up here about public radio pledging to promote music on the radio, which was an interesting story because we started seeing the changes to what was going on with radio and saying, okay, so stations like KEXP and others came across the board and they're like, all right, we're going to change this all, right? KMPC, WXPN, stations in Minneapolis, Philadelphia, Seattle, Austin, Texas, they were all changing around. And eventually we're like, well, we're going to make changes now. We're going to get ourselves into getting more of what's going out there for listeners. And things changed altogether.
Now onto this story from public radio. And I'm going to take this point across. He's talking about the hits of yesteryear, songs that made radio hits back when radio made the hits. To give a couple of examples, you have WMMR in Philadelphia, which, by the way, is still a rock station today. WBC in Boston, years. And then the stations they refer to as KUTX in Austin. Time. So there would be more organization. Like, we're not going back to free form here on these stations. Apparently that's not what's happening. But it can go there. Right? So here's what Billboard had. You know? A story comes from Elias Light, who always writes a lot of good stories for Billboard. He says, quote, it's not... this is where Larry Ross was talking about. We'll go back into this. A handful of public radio stations he talks about now are dedicated to playing new music and have enjoyed notable ratings bumps in recent years. And then the stations they refer to as KUTX in Austin, KEXP Seattle, KCMP Minneapolis, and WXPN Philadelphia. During this crisis for new music on the airways, these stations have excelled at finding and holding on to listeners excited by the prospect of discovering a track from an artist they never heard of. Which was the instillment, that was the appeal of free-form progressive rock radio. You didn't know what was going to be the next song next. Rachel Stillwell, she's a music and media attorney representing music industry coalitions before the FCC. She says, quote, as consolidated commercial radio conglomerates have sacrificed localism and diverse playlists in the interest of severely slashing jobs in recent years, it is no surprise that music listeners are turning to high quality and diverse public radio alternatives. Listen to that first part. I mean, you couldn't have said it better. Consolidated commercial radio conglomerates. We're talking about iHeartRadio, Odyssey, Town Square Media, among others. Sacrificing localism. So live and local, playing music that would be for the community. Maybe even some of the community-minded artists, or the community-centered artists, right? And also sacrificing diverse playlists. So expanded playlists. Taking a chance on some records that people might not have heard of. Not going for the sure thing like all these other, like their fellow large-scaled radio brethren, right? High quality and diverse public radio alternatives. So KU2X has led the pack. The second highest ranked music station in Austin, Texas. They're only behind adult hits KBPA. Well, for the younger format, it's very popular. Across 10 months of 2019, KUTX's average rating was 1.8, or 1.8% of the city listening to the station. Flash forward to 2022, and that ratings number has gone up to 5.7. And now it have leapfrogged all the other radio stations to be the number 2 station in the market. KUTX hit a stratosphere nobody has ever hit in this format. And several of KUTX's peers also soared. Seattle, you had KEXP playing adult, contemporary, and oldies. And their rating grew from 1.1 in 2019 to 3.7 in 2022.
There's a couple examples. So you're telling me that radio, first of all, they have their issues where they can't get advertisers on board, right? They're so complaining about that part. Day parts. Look, you got an NPR. These stations that are the non-commercial stations, They might have their underwriters, and they don't run a whole lot of them. They run limited breaks. And the music is what matters. They're not going over the top trying to go ahead and promote this and that social media and this and that contest. All about the music. And not just that, the music they're actually doing, they're not playing some kind of set playlist or whatever. Like I said, it's a different format. So, I mean, for those that always thought, oh no, these stations, you can't listen to anything above FM 92, right? No, that's wrong. People will absolutely go listen to stations wherever they want. If the music's there. If the music and the people that also will talk about the music are also there. Public radio is doing that. And look at that. Ratings went up. And people, a younger audience would actually go and find some of these shows. Fascinating. But commercial radio can't do that. And by the way, it's not like these public radio stations are full of people. By the way, if you got people that are able to go and, they can raise funds from to go ahead and do pledge drives to get this music and continue to make these stations happen, they must be doing something right. Just saying. So that's a good episode I had right there when we talked about that. Public radio pledges to promote new music on the radio. And we really went into a lot of that there. And it was fascinating to hear what they talked about. And then after that, we moved along into, the DC universe being rebooted. And by the way, now we see how bad things were when everything was going across, right? So there was supposed to be a new Batman, Supergirl movies, a Green Lantern TV show, and more. But then look what happened and then we'll see what happens when all these DC movies came out that all tanked. And Aquaman's about to fall into that spot right there as well. It's not good for them. And then I went ahead and did a full-fledged thing on the current state of terrestrial radio in 2023. And it was one of those stories where I just felt like, man, I need to go make a point and talk about what's so bad about these folks. Because there was so much we had going on when it came to radio that was really, it was very important to go and talk about. And it was not a good thing where we walked on everything that, AM radio being a threat to be taken out of car radios. There were stories out there about, plans to revitalize the industry. And the Radio Freedom Act got reintroduced. And if you don't remember what that was, that's when the lawmakers looked to bring something back where the counter to the American Music Freedom Act that would adjust royalties to be paid out to artists when music plays on traditional radio as it does on streaming and satellite services. So remember, you still got this going on where there's still a fight for this particular of this Radio Freedom Act. The local Radio Freedom Act would put the codified position by Congress does not impose a new performance tax, royalty or fee, or other types of financial charge on radio stations. It also applies to businesses where recordings are played for public performance. And the local Radio Freedom Act is what the National Association of Broadcasters wants to have. Because if the NAB is able to get that passed, then their union is going to be able to be intact. But if the American Music Freedom Act were to pass somewhere down the line, then radio would have to pay royalties because of this and because of the setup of the lawsuit from BMI and ASCAP. Then remember, those royalties are for artists. Meanwhile, BMI and ASCAP are collecting royalties for the songwriters. And if radio has to pay for both of those, then you can see iHeart or Odyssey or Alpha or Town Square or whatever, they would all strive to go on legislations. Just saying that's what would happen. There's more to that as well, but you know what? I would be worried about it. I would definitely be worried about it.
The radio still has up to 15, 20 minutes of commercial airtime per hour. Yes, it's free, but in this current stage, you can't sustain putting on a commercial for so long. Like, I mean, I had a struggle to program 12 to 14 minutes of commercials per hour, but I would put it into about 7-minute segments or 6-minute segments, what I could. Bam, bam, bam. No problems around it. Just get it in, get it out, go. The standard reasons for watching ad-supported content has also changed because of the digital disruption, because now you're going to get Netflix and Paramount Plus and Peacock and all these other streaming services offering ad-supported content where the new normal is, you might see 2 to 4 minutes of ads, and that's it. And if you're listening on streaming radio, you might hear 2 to 3 minutes of ads, maybe in an hour or two, and that's it. We're not hearing over-the-top in ads, so the model has to change. The ad model has to change, but then even more so, if the ad model cannot change, okay? It's real simple. Get the ads to be hosted by the hosts. All the great radio stations of the past, they used to go ahead and have to run all the commercials in, and they used to run them all and play songs maybe in between everything, but they would also have a way where the commercials would blend in. People can go back to jingles. It shouldn't be that hard. You can also go back to having the hosts be quippy and allow them to go ahead and do something different with the ad every time. So they still go through the ads, but then you do something where you just kind of change it up. Because the ads you have now for Babbel or Progressive or, pick it, or any of the local ads that we hear that are so plain Jane, because the clients cannot be pushed or motivated to get a little bit more creative. And the production team is more than happy to go and put out a bland product. I'm not saying they're not capable. I'm just saying they're not getting paid enough to do more. The equipment might be great, but they're not going to take the time to go and put more effort into something that they can just do the bare minimum for what they're getting paid for. Because remember, in these stations, I can tell you for a fact, I didn't get a salary upgrade at any time when I was there. That didn't happen. No 6% raise for evaluations for performance. No, not that cost of the upgrade. No, for some people, they got the same salary for 20 years. And in the days of less is more, the days of cutting out and starting to make cuts and laying off people, what they would do instead is they would make it where, let's just go ahead and cut somebody off before their pension kicks in, before their retirement kicks in, before the age that they need to go and get out of Social Security. So at the end of their career, you can't let them just finish off. No, you got to just kick them out.
And that's Terrestrial Radio. Where it was, where it's been, and it does piss me off still today when I look at what they've gone through. That's just February. There's so much more I can bring up. Okay, we had Cocaine Bear. The movie was coming out. That was really great. Podcasters are pivoting. Radio stations are switching. We talked about that. Sirius XM and a radio facing a new reality, because I was really into a radio kick. AI and the domination of streaming. Sirius XM, even now, they finally made some changes in themselves. Changed their app, trying to change their prices, trying to get things back on order. And then I talked about when music was diverse and inclusive and how the crossover needs to come back. So we're going to bring all that up in the next episode. We're going to keep it short tonight because there's so much more to bring up. And like I said, if things are going to stay quiet in the media news, then you know what? If I got 4 more weeks to go ahead and kind of fill in, then I'll take my time and do these year in reviews. Pretty segmented, very easy to compartmentalize and take it and put it together. And that's we'll just do it like that. Keep it simple, folks. That's how we're going to do it. All right. That is the program for tonight. Thank you for listening in. Finding the show as you always do. The Broadcasters Podcast domain is no longer there. So now you want to find the show, you got to go and look over at kingofpodcasts.com. That's where all my content is, and all the past episodes. And of course, X, formerly Twitter, Facebook, LinkedIn, Threads, TikTok. You can find me at King of Podcasts and at the YouTube channel at King of Podcasts. If you haven't done so, please subscribe, like, and share the videos. Also, go on the Rest of Us podcast, but the Depraved the Debaucherous program there on kingofpodcast.com and the YouTube. Until next week, remember the content is king, and the control of your content is in your hands.